The sky is full of them. October 14th, 1943. High above Schweinfurt, Germany, at 24,000 feet, Hauptmann Heinz Knoke's gloved hands gripped the control stick of his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6. Through his armored windscreen, he stared at something that defied comprehension. His words, recorded later that evening in his diary, which he had kept since 1941, betrayed a mix of awe and despair. The sky is full of them. From horizon to horizon, nothing but bombers. We are insects attacking eagles. Stretching across the autumn sky in combat box formations stacked from 23,000 to 27,000 feet, flew 291 Boeing B-17 flying fortresses of the American 8th Air Force. The morning sun reflected off their aluminum skin like a river of silver flowing toward the heart of the Reich. Each bomber bristled with 13.5 caliber machine guns, and together they could throw up a wall of lead that turned the sky into a lethal corridor. But it wasn't the sheer number that made Knoke's blood run cold. He had faced large formations before. It was the terrible realization that had begun to dawn on every Luftwaffe pilot in recent months. These 291 bombers represented perhaps only one-third of the American heavy bomber force in England. Just the day before, his squadron had participated in shooting down 60 American bombers in the first Schweinfurt raid, which the Luftwaffe had celebrated as its greatest single-day victory. Yet the Americans had returned with even more bombers, as if the losses meant nothing. Behind Knoke, 300 German fighters gathered. Messerschmitt Bf 109s, Focke-Wulf FW 190s, twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 110s, and even obsolete Junkers U-87 Stukas pressed into service as bomber destroyers. This force represented nearly every serviceable aircraft fighter within 400 kilometers. What Knoke knew, and what made his hands tremble slightly as he prepared to attack, was that this massive force was all Germany could muster. There would be no second wave, no reserves. The Americans, intelligence reports confirmed, were building 500 new bombers every month. The transformation of aerial warfare had begun 18 months earlier, though few in the Luftwaffe leadership recognized it at the time. In January 1942, the first American heavy bombers, 7 B-17Es of the 97th Bombardment Group, had arrived in England. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring had laughed when informed, declaring that American boys can't fight, and that their bombers were furniture vans that would fall apart under combat stress. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commanding GG-77 in North Africa at the time, would later write in his memoirs that the Luftwaffe's dismissal of American air power was the most catastrophic intelligence failure of the war. He had encountered American-built aircraft in British service and found them remarkably robust. The Americans built aircraft like they built automobiles, with interchangeable parts, simplified systems, and in quantities that boggled the European mind. The first warning signs appeared on August 17, 1942, when 18 B-17 bombers attacked the Ronsotteville marshalling yards in France. Hauptmann Rudolf Plantz, then leading 11 by JG-2, a specialized high-altitude squadron flying pressurized Bf-109G-1 fighters, had participated in the interception before his death on July 31, 1942. His after-action reports from May and June 1942, discovered in Luftwaffe archives after the war, noted with professional concern, the aircraft maintained formation despite severe damage. One B-17 returned to base with 200 cannon holes. Their defensive fire is murderous and well-coordinated. But it was the production statistics that should have terrified the German High Command. Those 18 bombers represented less than 2 days' production from American factories. By contrast, the entire German aircraft industry in 1942 would produce only 15,439 aircraft of all types. Bombers, fighters, transports, and trainers, combined. The Boeing Seattle plant alone was approaching a production rate that would reach 16 B-17s per day by mid-1944.
The October 14, 1943 mission to destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt would become known as Black Thursday to the Americans, who lost 600 bombers and 650 aircrew. For the Luftwaffe, it was simultaneously their greatest victory and the moment many pilots realized the war was already lost. Oberlieutenant Hans Philipp, commanding JG-1, shot down 2 B-17s that day before being killed by defensive fire from a third. His wingman, Feldwebel Stefan Litjens, survived and later testified about Philipp's final radio transmission. "These are not the same Americans we faced 6 months ago. Their gunnery is deadly accurate. They maintain formation under any punishment, and Berlin tells us this is only the beginning." The Luftwaffe claimed 60 bombers destroyed and 17 damaged, their highest single-day score of the war. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels announced it as proof of Fortress Europe's impregnable defenses. But the pilots, who had pressed home their attacks through the defensive fire, knew better. They had expended 90% of their ammunition, lost 38 fighters destroyed and 30 damaged, and suffered 28 pilots killed or wounded, nearly 25% of the attacking force. The winter of discontent. More terrifying was what happened next. Within 48 hours, American reconnaissance aircraft photographed the Schweinfurt factories, assessing the damage. Within a week, 240 replacement B-17s had arrived in England from America. Within 2 weeks, the 8th Air Force mounted another major raid with 378 bombers, more than had participated in the Schweinfurt mission. Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Willy Galland, brother of the famous Adolf Galland and commander of 2 JG-26, wrote in his diary, "We are Sisyphus. Each bomber we destroy is replaced by 2. Each pilot we lose is replaced by boys with 20 hours in a fighter. The Americans lose aircrew and train thousands more. We lose pilots and scrape the bottom of the barrel." The winter of 1943-1944 brought a temporary respite, as weather limited deep penetration raids, but it also brought devastating intelligence reports that circulated among senior Luftwaffe officers. These documents, many captured intact after the war, painted a picture of industrial capacity that dwarfed anything Germany had imagined possible. The Ford Willow Run plant in Michigan had achieved something German industry experts had declared impossible: assembly line production of 4-engine heavy bombers. The facility covered 3.5 million square feet and employed 42,000 workers. At peak production in April 1944, it rolled out a completed B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The plant alone would produce 6,972 complete aircraft, plus knockdown kits for another 1,893, a total contribution of 8,865 bombers. Oberst Joseph Pips, Preler, Geschwader Commodore of JG-26, obtained a captured American technical manual in December 1943. His report to Fighter Command stated, "The B-17G model now appearing has 13 machine guns, including a chin turret specifically designed to break up our frontal attacks. They have thought of everything. They have planned for everything. They can afford to plan for everything." The Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita were approaching 363 B-17s monthly at peak production. Douglas plants in Long Beach and Oklahoma City added 400 B-24s. Consolidated in San Diego and Fort Worth contributed another 300. Martin in Baltimore was producing 200 B-26 medium bombers. Republic on Long Island was manufacturing 400 P-47 fighters monthly. Against this, Germany's entire monthly production of single-engine fighters in late 1943 averaged 1,600 aircraft, though actual deliveries were lower due to the bombing of production facilities. February 20th, 25th, 1944. Operation Argument, known to history as Big Week, demonstrated American air power on a scale that shattered the last illusions of the Luftwaffe fighter force. On February 20th, Hauptmann Heiner, commanding IJG-1, took off from Rhine Airfield to intercept what radar reported as a large formation approaching from the west. Climbing through 20,000 feet, he found himself facing 1,030 American heavy bombers, escorted by 835 fighters, stretching across 200 miles of sky. "I have seen the end of Germany," he wrote in his diary that night. "The sky was dark with them. Our 12 fighters attacked a formation that stretched beyond sight. It was like 12 men attacking an army. We shot down perhaps 6 bombers. They barely noticed." The Americans launched 3,800 bomber sorties and 2,548 fighter sorties during Big Week. They lost 226 bombers and 28 fighters, losses that were replaced within 2 weeks. The Luftwaffe lost 262 fighters and, catastrophically, nearly 100 pilots killed, 14% of the total fighter pilot force. These pilots could not be replaced. The training schools, starved of fuel and instructors, were producing pilots with less than 50 hours of total flight time.
Oberstleutnant Hannes Trautloft, inspector of day fighters, compiled a devastating report. The average American pilot arrives in combat with over 200 hours of flight time, including 75 hours in type. Our new pilots have 40 hours total, perhaps 10 in a fighter. They are not pilots. They are victims waiting to die. March 4th, 1944, marked the beginning of the end. On this date, American P-51 Mustang fighters appeared over Berlin for the first time, when the 4th Fighter Group's P-51Bs escorted bombers on the 1,100-mile round trip to the German capital. The psychological impact was devastating. Major Günther Rau, commanding 3/GJ11 and Germany's third highest scoring ace with 275 victories, encountered Mustangs for the first time during the March 6 follow-up raid. His combat report survives in the Bundesarchiv. "The P-51 is faster than our Bf-109G at all altitudes. It turns out better, it dives faster, it has unlimited ammunition compared to our 60 seconds of cannon fire. Most critically, it has the range to escort bombers anywhere in Germany. We have nothing to match it." The calculus of annihilation, hour 12 to 18. The Mustang's Packard-built Merlin engine and laminar flow wing gave it a range of 1,650 miles with drop tanks, enough to escort bombers to any target in Germany and fight for 30 minutes over the objective. German pilots, who had been trained to wait until fighter escorts turned back at the old limit of their range, now found themselves facing fresh American fighters over Prague, Vienna, and even Warsaw. Lieutenant Franz Keller, a veteran of 487 combat missions, described the new reality in a letter to his brother. "The Mustangs wait above us like hawks. When we climb to attack the bombers, they dive on us. Their speed in the dive exceeds 500 miles per hour. By the time we evade them, the bombers are gone. If we pursue the bombers, the Mustangs destroy us from behind. It is a systematic execution." By April 1944, the 8th Air Force could mount 1,000 bomber raids with 800 fighter escorts, and did so repeatedly. The calculus of annihilation was simple and inexorable. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, commanding Germany's fighter forces, presented a report to Hitler on April 27, 1944, that laid out the stark reality. A memo from July 27, 1944, laid out the grim reality for Germany's Air Force. It highlighted the vast and unsustainable difference in production and personnel between the American and German forces. The Americans were producing over 3,000 bombers and 4,000 fighters each month, and graduating more than 30,000 new pilots each month. In stark contrast, Germany's theoretical fighter production was only 1,600 per month, with actual deliveries being lower due to constant bombing. The pilot situation was even worse, as they were only graduating 500 pilots per month, and those new pilots had inadequate training. To compound the problem, the German Air Force was losing over 400 pilots a month, a rate they could hope not to replace. "The enemy comes in waves," Galland told Hitler. "For every bomber we destroy, they send 3. For every fighter we shoot down, they send 5. We are not fighting an air force. We are fighting an airborne industry. Hitler's response, according to Galland's memoirs, was to scream about betrayal and cowardice, ordering that any pilot who broke off an attack be court-martialed. This order, requiring pilots to ram bombers if necessary, would lead to even higher losses among irreplaceable veteran pilots. The individual stories of Luftwaffe pilots from this period reveal the psychological toll of fighting an unwinnable battle against overwhelming odds. Hauptmann Robert Weiss, commanding 3/GJ-54, had 121 victories when he was shot down and killed by P-51s on December 29, 1944. His final letter to his wife, written the night before his death, survives. Each day we have fewer aircraft and fewer pilots. The boys they send us from training can barely land their aircraft, much less fight. Yesterday we had 6 aircraft serviceable to meet 800 bombers and 600 fighters. It is not war anymore. It is execution.
Feldwebel Rudi Müller, a maintenance chief with JG-3, kept a detailed diary of serviceability rates. Germany's Air Force faced a catastrophic decline in operational readiness during 1944, as revealed by a memo detailing the steady drop in the serviceability of its fighter aircraft. In January 1944, 67% of the fighters were serviceable. By March, that number had plummeted to 45%, largely due to a critical lack of spare parts. The situation worsened dramatically by May, with only 31% of the fleet being operational, this time because of a severe shortage of fuel needed for test flights. The collapse was complete by July 1944, when a mere 18% of the fighters were serviceable, a dire situation attributed to a complete lack of all necessary resources. "We cannibalized 3 aircraft to keep one flying," he wrote. "The Americans lose 50 aircraft in a raid and don't even notice. We lose 5 and the squadron is crippled for a week." The strategic bombing campaign's effect on German fuel production created a cascading failure that multiplied American numerical superiority. By May 1944, attacks on synthetic oil plants had reduced aviation fuel production from 180,000 tons to 20,000 tons monthly. Oberst Hermann Graf, Germany's 9th highest scoring ace with 212 victories, commanded JG-11 during this period. His unit diary records the progressive paralysis. Training flights canceled to save fuel. Combat missions are limited to 30 to 45 minutes. Aircraft grounded with full ammunition but no fuel. Pilots prohibited from pursuing damaged bombers to conserve fuel. The Americans come with full tanks, fight until their ammunition is exhausted, and fly home, Graf wrote. "We take off with enough fuel for one pass of the bombers and a fighting withdrawal. If we engage the escorts, we don't have fuel to reach the bombers. If we attack the bombers, we don't have fuel to evade the escorts. We are defeated before we take off." The Americans, meanwhile, were consuming 20 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly in the European theater alone, more than Germany's total production for all purposes. The ultimate humiliation, 18 to 24. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The Allied invasion of Normandy provided the most stunning demonstration of American air supremacy. Oberst Josef Pieps Preller, leading JG-26, was one of only 2 German fighter pilots to attack the invasion beaches on D-Day. He and his wingman, Hans Walter Schick, made a single strafing round on Sword Beach before fleeing from dozens of Allied fighters. "Where is the Luftwaffe?" Hitler demanded. The answer was stark. The Luftwaffe had 319 serviceable fighters in France and Belgium to face 11,590 Allied aircraft. The Americans alone launched 8,722 sorties on D-Day. The Luftwaffe managed 319. Oberleutnant Harald Quandt, stationed at Lille with 2X JG-26, described the day in his diary. "We sat in our shelters and listened to the radio reports. Thousands of ships, thousands of aircraft. We had 7 serviceable fighters. 7. The squadron commander forbade us to take off. He said it would be murder. Not combat, murder." The introduction of the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter in the summer of 1944 briefly gave some Luftwaffe pilots hope. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, It was 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. Major Walter Novotny, commanding the world's first jet fighter unit, Commando Novotny, initially believed the Me-262 could restore air superiority. After 2 months of operations, he wrote a sobering report to Galland. "The jets are revolutionary, but too few, too late. We have 30 operational Me-262s. The Americans sent 1,500 bombers and 800 fighters today. If we had 1,000 Me-262s, we might make a difference. We will be lucky to have 100 by year's end." Novotny was killed on November 8, 1944, shot down by P-51s while trying to land his damaged Me-262. His last radio transmission, "I'm burning, too many of them." By war's end, Germany had produced 1,430 Me-262s. Only about 300 ever saw combat. The Americans produced 15,000 P-51 Mustangs.
The surviving Luftwaffe aces who lived through this period provided invaluable testimony about the psychological impact of facing American industrial might. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, in his post-war memoirs, The First and the Last, wrote, "By mid-1944, I knew the war was lost. It was no longer a question of tactics or courage or technology. It was simple arithmetic. They could lose 100 aircraft in a raid and replace them in 3 days. We lost 10 aircraft and never replaced them." Major Erich Hartmann, history's highest-scoring fighter ace with 352 victories, fought exclusively on the Eastern Front until 1945, but was transferred west in the war's final months. His first encounter with American bomber formations left him stunned. "I had shot down dozens of Soviet aircraft, but this was different," he said. "The Americans came in parade formation, geometrically perfect, hundreds of them. Their defensive fire was like a wall of tracers. They maintained formation while being attacked, while on fire, while dying. It was not heroism, it was industrial warfare." Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, who flew 993 combat missions and scored 176 victories, later served as Chief of Staff of the post-war Luftwaffe and NATO's military committee. His reflection on facing American air power was particularly insightful. "We were artisans fighting an industrial machine. Each of our pilots was carefully trained over years, each aircraft hand-built. The Americans mass-produced pilots and planes like automobiles. When we shot down a B-17, 10 more appeared. When they shot down a Bf-109, it was irreplaceable." By autumn 1944, the Luftwaffe was dying, not from battle, but from systematic deprivation of fuel, pilots, parts, and hope. Major Heinz Knoke, who ended the war with 220 victories, commanded JG-1 during the final year. His unit records revealed the progressive collapse. By September 1944, the German Air Force's desperate situation had reached a critical point. One unit reported having only 40 pilots and 12 serviceable aircraft. They received 10 replacement pilots, but none had more than 50 hours of total flight time, and 3 of them crashed on landing, killing 2 pilots. The situation worsened in October 1944 when fuel allocations were cut by 75%, restricting them to flying just 1 mission every 3 days, even as the Americans continued their daily bombing raids. A memo from November 1944 revealed the ultimate desperation. Pilots were ordered to ram enemy bombers if they ran out of ammunition. A pilot lamented, "This is not combat, it is suicide." The pilot drew a stark contrast with Japanese kamikaze pilots, who had a warrior tradition for such sacrifice and felt they were being asked to die for a lie. The final crushing blow came in December 1944 when 1,000 American bombers attacked. The unit, with only 4 serviceable aircraft, did not even attempt to take off, a pilot questioning, "What is the point?"
Operation Bodenplot and the End. January 1st, 1945. Operation Bodenplot, the Luftwaffe's final major offensive operation, demonstrated the futility of fighting American industrial supremacy. The Luftwaffe assembled every available fighter in the West, approximately 850 to 900 aircraft, for a surprise attack on Allied airfields. It was the largest German air operation in over a year. They destroyed 305 Allied aircraft, mostly on the ground. The Allied response was to continue operations without pause. Within a week, every destroyed aircraft had been replaced. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and, critically, 143 pilots killed or missing, including 3 Geschwaderkommodore and 5 Gruppenkommodore, losses that could never be replaced. Oberstleutnant Dietrich Peltz, who planned the operation, later admitted, "We destroyed more Allied aircraft in one morning than in the previous 3 months. It made no difference. They replaced everything within days. We lost experienced pilots we could never replace. It was our death blow delivered by our own hand." February 1945 brought the final humiliation. The Luftwaffe could barely mount a token resistance to 1,000-bomber raids that systematically destroyed German cities. On February 3, 1945, the Americans sent 1,437 B-17s and B-24s, escorted by 948 fighters, to bomb Berlin in daylight. The Luftwaffe managed to launch 28 fighters in defense of the capital. 23 were shot down. Lieutenant Walter Hagen, flying one of the surviving fighters, described the experience. "We climbed toward the bomber stream. It was like flying toward a cloud, except the cloud was made of aluminum and death. The escort fighters were layered above and around them, hundreds of Mustangs and Thunderbolts. We made one pass, fired our cannons, and dived away. I don't know if I hit anything. There were so many bombers it didn't matter." March 1945 revealed the full extent of American productive supremacy. Intelligence reports reaching Luftwaffe headquarters showed the United States had produced 96,318 aircraft in 1944 alone. 35,000 were 4-engine heavy bombers. Total fighter production was 38,873. Monthly production was still increasing. Germany's total aircraft production for 1944 was 39,807, of which only 25,228 were fighters. Most never flew due to a lack of fuel, pilots, or parts. Germany produced 24,981 fighters throughout 1944, reaching its highest monthly totals in the autumn, months before Allied bombing of synthetic fuel plants crippled output. Major Wolfgang Falk, who had created the Luftwaffe's night fighter force, calculated that the Americans had dropped 1.46 million tons of bombs on Germany, the explosive equivalent of 33 Hiroshima bombs. The accuracy was steadily improving with new radar and navigation aids. By March 1945, American bombers could put 90% of their bombs within 1,000 feet of the target from 25,000 feet altitude. Falk observed, "They had turned warfare into mathematics. So many tons of bombs equals so much destruction. So many fighters equals air superiority. So many trained pilots equals victory. We were not defeated, we were calculated out of existence." April 1945. The Luftwaffe existed only on paper. Of 1,500 fighters supposedly available, perhaps 50 could fly on any given day. Oberst Gordon Golub, with 15 victories, was appointed to command the fighter defense of the Reich in April 1945. He found no fuel for operations, no ammunition for the aircraft, no pilots to fly them, no parts for repairs, and no airfields not under constant attack. His first and last order as commander: save the aircraft for the museum, save the pilots for their families. The war is over. After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided extensive testimony about the psychological impact of facing American air power. Generalmajor Josef Schmid, last commander of Luftwaffe Command West, testified at the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, quote, "From 1943 onward, we were not fighting to win. We were fighting to delay defeat. Every pilot who took off knew he was facing 10-to-1 odds or worse. They knew each mission might face 1,000 bombers. It was not combat. It was industrial slaughter." Major Georg Peter Eder, with 78 victories, including 36 4-engine bombers, described the evolution of his thinking, quote, In 1943, I believed we could stop them through superior tactics and courage. By early 1944, I knew we needed miracle weapons. By late 1944, I knew we needed an actual miracle. The Americans had turned air warfare into an assembly line. We were fighting Ford and Boeing and Douglas and Lockheed and Republic and North American and Consolidated. We never had a chance. The final statistics of the air war reveal the impossible odds the Luftwaffe faced against the Allied forces. Between 1942 and 1945, American aircraft production utterly dwarfed that of Germany, with the U.S. producing a staggering 300,000 aircraft compared to Germany's 119,970. This disparity was particularly stark in key categories. The U.S. manufactured 35,000 four-engine heavy bombers, while Germany produced only 1,194 of the HE-177. Similarly, American fighter production of 99,950 units nearly doubled Germany's output of 53,729. The chasm in pilot training was even more significant, with the U.S. training 800,000 pilots, while Germany trained a mere 28,000, many of whom were inadequately prepared. The human and material losses paint an even more vivid picture of the lopsided conflict. In Europe, the Americans lost 18,369 aircraft, which represented only 6.1% of their total production. In stark contrast, Germany lost an astonishing 57,000 aircraft, amounting to 48% of its total production. The human cost for the Luftwaffe was equally devastating. While American air crew casualties numbered 94,565, 11.8% of their trained pilots, German casualties were 44,650, which amounted to a staggering 157% of their trained pilot pool. This figure indicates that many German pilots were shot down multiple times, highlighting the unsustainable and brutal nature of the air war for them. The final reality. By May 1945, the United States had 41,163 operational military aircraft. Germany had fewer than 100. The Luftwaffe pilots who survived underwent a profound psychological transformation. They had begun the war as the world's premier air force, victorious from Spain to Poland to France. They ended it by hiding their aircraft under trees, hoping to preserve enough fuel for one more mission. Hauptmann Franz von Wehr, the only German pilot to successfully escape from Allied captivity and return to Germany, reported to Goering in 1941 about American industrial capacity after seeing it firsthand. His warnings were dismissed as defeatist. Quote, "The Reichsmarschall accused me of being corrupted by enemy propaganda. He could not conceive of such industrial power," end quote. Oberlieutenant Hans-Ulrich Rudel, the most decorated German serviceman of the war with 2,530 combat missions, primarily flew on the Eastern Front, but encountered American air power in 1945. His observation was stark. Quote, "The Soviets had quantity. The Americans had quantity that worked perfectly. Every bomber was pristine. Every fighter was maintained immaculately. Their pilots were well-fed, well-rested, and well-trained. We were sending skeletal boys in patched aircraft with empty stomachs to face them." End quote. Major Heinz Knoke himself, who flew 2,000 missions and scored 33 victories, kept detailed records of the changing odds throughout the war.
As the air war progressed, the German Luftwaffe's ability to counter Allied bombing raids deteriorated from a manageable threat to a hopeless cause. In 1943, German pilots reported attacking bomber formations of 60 to 100 aircraft, a challenge they could manage with 20 to 30 fighters. By early 1944, the situation had worsened, with Allied formations swelling to 200 to 300 bombers escorted by 100 fighters. At this point, the Germans realized they needed every available aircraft just to make an impression.
The shift from difficult to impossible became brutally clear in late 1944. Allied raids grew to include 500 to 750 bombers, protected by 400 escort fighters. German pilots, with just a dozen serviceable aircraft, were forced to watch helplessly from the ground, unable to even reach the enemy. By 1945, the air war had effectively ended for Germany. Allied formations now consisted of over 1,000 bombers and 800 escorts. The Luftwaffe pilots no longer took off. They simply watched from the ground and waited for the end. His final entry, May 7, 1945. The Americans could have won with 1/10 of what they sent. They sent everything to make a point. The point was made. Perhaps no testimony better captures the Luftwaffe's recognition of defeat than the secret recording of General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, Chief of Air Fleet Reich, speaking to fellow prisoners in May 1945, recorded by British intelligence. "Gentlemen, we were not defeated by courage or skill. The Americans were brave, yes, but no braver than us. Their pilots were skilled, but no more skilled than our expert aces. We were defeated by production capacity. They produced more in a month than we could in a year. They trained more pilots in a week than we could in 6 months. They dropped more bombs in one raid than we dropped on England in the entire war. This was not war as we understood it. This was industrial execution. They turned their entire nation into an aircraft factory. Every woman who had made washing machines now made aircraft parts. Every man who had built cars now built bombers. They approached war like they approached business, with spreadsheets, production quotas, and efficiency metrics. We fought with the passion of warriors. They fought with the precision of accountants. The accountants won." For many Luftwaffe pilots, there was a specific moment when they knew the war was lost. These moments, collected from memoirs, interviews, and private letters, reveal the psychological impact of facing overwhelming industrial might. Industrial verdict and lasting legacy. "I counted 7 combat boxes, each with 54 bombers, and this was one of 3 raids that day. I landed and told my commander, 'The war is over. We just don't know it yet.'" Hauptmann Wilhelm Botz, JG-52, April 1944. "We shot down 11 B-17s in one mission. Our best day ever. The next morning, the Americans came with 50 more bombers than the previous day. Our victory hadn't even been noticed." Major Klaus Mitusch, JG-26, September 1944. "A B-17 with 2 engines out, its tail shot away, still flying, still shooting, still in formation. Its gunners killed 2 of our best pilots. This dying bomber was more dangerous than our best fighters. That's when I understood American power. Even their dying machines were lethal." Beyond mere numbers, American technological advancement continuously widened the gap. Each new model of American aircraft was superior to its predecessor. Meanwhile, German aircraft, starved of development resources, stagnated. The B-17G, introduced in late 1943, featured a Bendix chin turret with twin 50 caliber guns, an electronic supercharger for consistent high-altitude performance, radar navigation aids, and chaff dispensers to confuse German radar.
German fighters were increasingly simplified to speed production. Deletion of cockpit heating systems, replacement of electric systems with manual ones, use of substitute materials as aluminum became scarce, reduction in armor protection to save weight, and the elimination of radios in training aircraft. Oberleutnant Heinrich Erler, who would score 208 victories before his death, wrote, "Each month American aircraft get better. Each month ours get worse. They add guns, we remove armor. They improve engines, we dilute fuel. They enhance electronics, we eliminate radios. We're going backward while they accelerate forward." The comparison of pilot training highlights the overwhelming advantage the American forces held over the German Luftwaffe by 1944. A German victory was an impossibility, as reflected in the significant disparities across key training metrics. By 1944, American pilots received 200 or more total flight hours, with over 75 hours dedicated to the specific aircraft they would fly in combat.
In stark contrast, German pilots' total flight time had been severely reduced from 450 hours in 1941 to only 160 hours, with a mere 15 to 20 hours spent on their operational type. The disparity in specialized training was even more pronounced. American pilots underwent 50 hours of gunnery training, while their German counterparts received only 5 hours. The U.S. also prioritized formation training, a critical skill for both offensive and defensive maneuvers, which was entirely absent from the German curriculum due to resource shortages. The training environment itself put German pilots at a severe disadvantage. American pilots had access to unlimited fuel and trained in an environment free from combat pressure. Conversely, German flight schools faced severe fuel restrictions, and their airfields were under constant Allied attack, further disrupting the already limited training they could provide. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, inspector of fighter pilots, reported in December 1944, "We are sending children to their deaths. They cannot fly, much less fight. They cannot hold formation. They cannot aim. They cannot even land safely. Of 10 new pilots sent to units, 8 are dead within 2 weeks." By late 1944, Luftwaffe morale had collapsed entirely. Suicide rates among pilots increased 400%. Desertion, previously unknown, became common. Some pilots deliberately damaged their aircraft to avoid flying. Secret SS reports from the period discovered after the war document the crisis. SS Obersturmbannführer Wilhelm Domberg, December 1944, "Fighter pilots openly speak of the war being lost. They call combat missions suicide flights. Some pilots are shooting off their own ammunition over friendly territory and returning, claiming combat. Morale cannot be restored by propaganda or punishment. The men have seen the enemy's strength."
The Luftwaffe tried increasingly desperate measures. Sturmgruppen ordered to ram bombers, ramjagged units specifically created for suicide attacks. Court-martials for cowardice increased by 800%, and families of pilots threatened with concentration camps. Nothing worked. The pilots had seen too much. March 18, 1945, brought the ultimate humiliation. 1,329 American heavy bombers and 733 fighters attacked Berlin in daylight. The Luftwaffe launched 37 fighters in defense of the Reich's capital. Me-262 jets managed to shoot down 8 bombers. The escorts shot down 25 German fighters, including 5 jets. Adolf Galland, flying an Me-262 with JV-44, the squadron of experts, composed of Germany's highest-scoring aces, described the day. "We took off knowing it was futile. Each of us, Barkhorn, Hohagen, Kinski, Lutzow, had over 100 victories. Together, we had destroyed over 1,000 enemy aircraft, and we could do nothing. Nothing. We were insects attacking an avalanche." By April 1945, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist. American bombers flew over Germany in bright aluminum finish, no longer needing camouflage paint. They flew in straight lines to their targets, no longer needing evasive action. Fighter escorts were often canceled as unnecessary. 8th Air Force mission reports from April 1945 note, "No enemy aircraft observed, no flak encountered, target destroyed without opposition." The crew report mission resembled a training flight. The final Luftwaffe sortie rate tells the story. A dramatic decline in the German Luftwaffe's operational capacity is evident when comparing its sortie rates throughout the war. In May 1940, during the Battle of France, the Luftwaffe was capable of flying 5,000 sorties daily. This number dropped to 3,000 sorties daily during the Battle of Britain in August 1940. However, the true collapse became clear in the final years of the war. By D-Day in June 1944, the Luftwaffe could only manage a paltry 319 sorties, a number that plummeted further to 50 to 100 sorties daily by March 1945. By May 1945, just before the end of the war in Europe,
the once mighty Luftwaffe could muster fewer than 10 sorties daily, a testament to its complete and utter defeat. After Germany's surrender, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed hundreds of Luftwaffe personnel. Their testimonies, declassified in the 1960s, provide the final verdict on American industrial might. General Feldmarschall Erich Milch, Inspector General of the Luftwaffe, said, "We knew from intelligence reports that America was producing 8,000 aircraft monthly by 1944. We couldn't believe it. It seemed impossible. Our best month ever was in autumn 1944, when we approached 4,000 aircraft. But the intelligence was wrong. They were producing 9,000 monthly. How do you fight a nation that produces more aircraft in 2 months than you have produced in 2 years?" General der Jagdflieger Hans-Jürgen Stumpf said, "The Americans proved that modern war is not won by warriors, but by workers. Every bomber that appeared over Germany represented thousands of workers in factories, mines, and refineries. We were not fighting pilots. We were fighting Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Seattle." The final accounting of the air war reveals the impossible challenge the Luftwaffe faced. During World War II, the United States maintained an overwhelming advantage over Germany in air power, production, and capability, as reflected in several key metrics. Production and ratios. The U.S. produced 35,000 four-engine heavy bombers, a staggering 29-to-1 ratio compared to Germany's output of only 1,194. For fighters, the ratio was less lopsided but still significant, with U.S. producing 99,950 compared to Germany's 53,729, a ratio of 1.9 to 1. Training and logistics. In terms of pilot training, the U.S. pilots received over 200 hours of flight time, a 1.5 to 1 advantage over their German counterparts, who received only 110 to 160 hours by 1944. Compounding Germany's disadvantage was a critical lack of fuel. By 1945, Germany had access to only 10% of the fuel it required, while the U.S. had unlimited availability. Operational capacity. The disparity in resources and production directly translated into operational capacity. At its peak, the U.S. Air Force could mount over 8,000 sorties daily, a massive 80-to-1 ratio compared to Germany's peak of just 100 sorties daily. This vast difference in operational capacity ultimately crippled the Luftwaffe and ensured Allied air dominance.
The psychological impact on German pilots extended far beyond the war. Many suffered from what would later be recognized as PTSD, specifically from the experience of fighting against impossible odds. Dr. Hans-Joachim Limann, a Luftwaffe medical officer who later became a psychiatrist, studied veteran fighter pilots in the 1950s. They suffered from a unique trauma, not from what they experienced, but from what they witnessed. They saw their nation's impotence against American industrial power. They watched their friends die fighting an enemy who barely noticed the losses. They experienced not defeat, but irrelevance. In 1962, a reunion of former Luftwaffe fighter pilots was held in Munich. Adolf Galland, the keynote speaker, reflected on the lessons of facing American air power. "We learned that in modern war, the factory is more important than the airfield, the assembly line more decisive than the front line, the worker more valuable than the warrior. America taught us that industrial democracy could produce more than totalitarian efficiency. They buried us under the weight of their production. But we also learned something else. The Americans rebuilt our nation after defeating it. They protected us from Soviet expansion. They turned enemies into allies. This was their greatest victory. Not that they could produce 100,000 aircraft, but that they chose to use that power to rebuild rather than to punish." On April 26, 1985, the 40th anniversary of his capture, Johannes Steinhoff, former Luftwaffe ace and later NATO commander, spoke at the U.S. Air Force Academy. "Young officers, let me tell you what it means to face American air power. It means to watch the horizon turn black with bombers. It means to count your ammunition in seconds while they count theirs in hours. It means to see your best pilots, men who had survived 5 years of combat, swept from the sky in minutes. But more than that, it means to witness the awesome power of democratic industrial might unleashed. Every B-17 that appeared over Germany was a testament to American workers, American resources, and American determination. We counted our aircraft in dozens, you counted yours in thousands. We measured fuel in liters, you measured it in oceans. The lesson is not that America won because it was rich. The lesson is that America could mobilize its riches because it was free. Free workers outproduced slave labor, free enterprise outmanufactured state control, free citizens outfought zealous warriors.
I flew 993 combat missions, he continued. I shot down 176 aircraft. I was shot down 12 times. But my most important mission was the one I had in my mind. The long journey from Nazi zealot to democratic citizen, from enemy to ally, from defeat to understanding. To the young Americans here, your ancestors didn't just defeat us, they transformed us. They showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production. Not from ideology, but from industry. Not from hatred, but from humanity. The bombing was destructive. The rebuilding was transformative. We who once filled the skies as enemies now fill this room as friends. That is America's true victory. The story of the Luftwaffe's recognition of defeat is ultimately a story of industrial capacity, overwhelming, merciless, undeniable industrial capacity. When Hartmann Heinz Knoke looked up at those 291 B-17s over Schweinfurt on October 14, 1943, he was seeing more than an enemy formation. He was seeing the mathematical certainty of German defeat. Each bomber represented 1.2 million rivets installed by American workers. Each engine represented 7,000 precisely machined parts. Each crew member represented 200-plus hours of training. Multiply that by 1,000 bomber raids, and the equation became unsolvable. The Luftwaffe aces were among the finest fighter pilots in history. Many had over 100 victories. Some had over 200. Erich Hartmann had 352. But heroism could not overcome production figures. Skill could not defeat statistics. Courage could not conquer industrial output. In the end, every Luftwaffe pilot who looked up at the aluminum overcast of American bombers knew the same truth. They were not fighting an air force. They were fighting an entire nation mobilized for production. And that nation could lose 100 bombers in a day and launch 200 more the next morning. The war was over the moment American industry reached full production. The Luftwaffe pilots were simply the first to see it, written across the sky in formations of flying fortresses that stretched from horizon to horizon, an endless river of aluminum that flowed toward the heart of the Reich, carrying not just bombs, but the mathematical proof of Germany's defeat. They saw hundreds of American bombers and they knew the war was lost. Not because of what those bombers would destroy, but because of what they represented, the unlimited industrial capacity of a democracy aroused. In that recognition lay both defeat and, ultimately, redemption. For in seeing American power, they also witnessed American purpose, not conquest, but liberation, not vengeance, but reconstruction, not hatred, but the hope that enemies could become allies. The industrial verdict had been delivered, the Luftwaffe had witnessed it, and in witnessing, they had learned a truth that would reshape the post-war world. Industrial democracy was the most powerful force on Earth, and America was its arsenal.